thanks everybody for coming to, I can't remember what lecture because I have the handouts printed, but they're at this photocopy place. So I'll have the handouts next week for those that are coming each week. So I apologize for that. But we sent Gail down to California, and kind of on my own. It's been a little awkward, but as we were just chatting, she was in the Oaksterdam campus in San Francisco yesterday, and we saw her live on the Cannabis Culture video on the phone behind Jody, and then it's amazing. In a way, today's talk is about media, and I want to talk about what's happening now as opposed to why we're in this mess because of the media in large part. But it was really amazing yesterday to be sitting in our store, and we got some folks in the chat with Jody, and we had Gail saying hi and waving from California to us in our store yesterday. And that wasn't possible a few years ago. And go on, jump in, let's get going. And so even though, if you hadn't heard yet, Prop 19 failed yesterday, in many ways, every attempt that we make to make a change, to stand up and speak for ourselves, even if it's a case of a person being caught in possession of cannabis and standing up and fighting with either a not guilty plea or in defense, telling the judge that there is no crime here to be punished for. And even if you fail in those cases, as I have, being convicted for sharing joints up at UVic here, I think it's really important for us to just keep fighting. And if it were easy, it would have been done a long time ago. And so, today I want to focus on the media because in a lot of ways, whether we like it or not, the media is critical in this war of information, because that's in many ways what we're dealing with here. It's a war of words. They have guns, sure, they have jails, they have got all the artillery in the world, to the point where it's not even close to being a battle physically fought. It's an intellectual battle. Hey guys, we got the handouts, so they'll be here next week.
That's okay, I have road all the way up here.
Like I say, we're involved for the most part in a war of words and a war of thought, and interacting and using the media is important for us to make changes. And so I guess maybe I should give a little bit of a intro into the media and how it works, because we wouldn't be here if the media hadn't have been first and foremost involved in the war on cannabis. In 1916, a process was essentially developed that could turn the hurd, like the cork in the middle of the cannabis plant, into paper. The ancient paper you've heard about was made of the fiber. The cannabis stalk is essentially two things: the fiber, the strands on the outside, and then this kind of cork in the middle. Pretty easy to make paper out of the fiber. It's been happening for, again, thousands of years. But in 1916, what was almost a waste product, the hurd it's called, was all of a sudden made much more valuable because you could make it into paper. And there was at the same time an invention called the decorticator that George Glitzkin invented. The patent was bought by a newspaper company, and that newspaper company, Scripps Newspapers, had also, with a number of other newspapers, just developed or spent a lot of money developing pulp and paper infrastructure, buying up the rights to cut down miles and miles of beautiful old growth forest to turn into paper. It was a lot cheaper than paying farmers for annual crops to just mow down trees. It was a lot more expensive to do it. You had to use a lot more chemicals to make paper out of wood than you would even out of cannabis. So in some ways it's more labor intensive, but you don't have to pay very much for the fiber at the time. So that newspaper company and their affiliates, primarily the Hearst newspaper company, in 1916 were both aware of the potential new development of hemp paper and this new processing machine, which the decorticator could go into a field and quickly cut down the plant and separate the fiber from the herd pretty much on the spot. Had never been done before, and you could almost like squeeze the herd into paper, you know, like it was that easy to do in some sense. And so the hemp plant all of a sudden became on the radar. Before that, the media didn't really care much about hemp. It was competing with cotton. The hemp seed oil was competing along with vegetable oils with fossil fuels. There's a big debate about that at the time. But until 1916, the media didn't really have much concern. And then all of a sudden it's like, what? That's competition? Well, that's got to go. Very quickly, William Hearst came up with the term marijuana. Never been heard before. Nobody knew about it. Everybody knew about cannabis indica, been made into medicine for thousands of years. Everybody knew that. Everybody knew about hashish and the writers and intellectuals that would use hashish and the ancient stories of Arabian hashish and all these things. So hash wasn't that big of a problem, but marijuana, no one knew of it. The media did an exceptional job at creating a situation that didn't exist, and in many ways it's a phenomenal story, almost hard to believe. But in other ways they did an incredible job convincing the public that there was this new Mexican drug that was causing people to, on one hand, if it was a guy that was smoking it, well, he was going to go and rape and murder his neighbors. But if it was a female that smoked it, well, she'd want to run around naked and make love to everyone. So it was kind of like, you know, they brought up sort of the most extreme stories, and people just believed somehow everything and anything that was said about it in the absence of any real information. Because honestly, at the time, in the 1920s and 30s, cannabis was not used very much at all. There were some, you know, small subcultures of people. Sailors, for example, were traveling around the world, and hash was very common in the ports of the world. And otherwise, certainly the black people who'd been kept as slaves had used it, and a big part of the resentment against those folk was enacted in this legislation, because a lot of racist pigs saw this as an opportunity to both throw people of color in jail in general, indiscriminately almost, and at the same time, protect their economic interests. Anyway, the conspiracy, as it's called, or just economic strategy, as it were, is laid out very clearly in Jack Hare's book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And it's very unfortunate, but it's that fact that if it weren't for the truth that hemp could be made into really good paper, this plant would not likely be illegal at all. This industry has been more critical in it being suppressed than any other.
Doesn't it last a lot longer than normal paper?
I believe it can be recycled a lot more than wood-based paper as well. I don't know the exact number. I haven't gotten into that, but my understanding is that wood paper can only be recycled and reused a handful of times, and hemp can be used. I don't think it's twice as much, but it certainly is a stronger fiber when it's used. I think part of the thing with the wood paper is the chemicals in it cause it to break down eventually. It's very acid sort of based chemicals that they use for that. So the newspaper industry was critical, and then that went to the movies, and there was a lot of movies put out. Reefer Madness kind of films that showed young people, smoking a joint and doing all sorts of crazy, wacky things. Unfortunately, I don't even seem to have a PowerPoint. I thought I had one, but it's disappeared. But there are a number of sort of Reefer Madness films that came out and again tried to portray cannabis use as causing everything from killing to just other outrageous forms of behavior. And so these memories were ingrained in the public. And when cannabis started to become more used in the 60s and 70s, the media and Hollywood switched gears, and they realized that the truth was coming out, and they couldn't stigmatize us as these evil, nasty people. And the gear that they switched was one of from us being problems in a criminal sense to just complete degenerates in another. And there's a lot of movies that portray people that use cannabis as outcasts, and there's any number of films, like anywhere from Easy Rider to certainly the Cheech and Chong films, where cannabis use and the culture around it don't really inspire I guess any intellectual thought or appreciation of what this plant can really do. And so we went from being like these murdering rapists to these clowns and buffoons and people that weren't really respected and were laughed at. And unfortunately, there's a lot of movies that have come out from Hollywood over the decades that have really portrayed us as buffoons or criminals or both. There's been very, very few movies that have come out with a real portrayal of our culture. One of the few that may have come out is Half Baked, and even at the end of that, the guy is giving up pot for his girlfriend, which is not as common as one might think. But again, the theme coming out of Hollywood is that cannabis use is not going to really improve your life in any sense, and so it's been really unfortunate. But now things are changing. There's lots of documentaries coming out, and there's in some sense more truth being shown. But shows like Trailer Park Boys and Weeds really don't make us look like outstanding citizens in any sense of the word. And so for some of us that live and work in the field, it can be a little bit unnerving watching these comedy portrayals of us. It's great to laugh, don't get me wrong. I make fun of myself and what I do all the time. It's great to do that, you have to laugh. But at the same time, it's something that I firmly believe the people that are running these shows have an agenda, and that agenda is not to have people freely growing cannabis in any sense. And and the media to this day, before I come into sort of our media and the new media, is putting out tons and tons of information. I don't have the actual print copy here, but this is from Calgary, where an article has come out in the paper about an individual who's been found criminally insane because of cannabis withdrawal. Apparently this guy has mental health issues, and he was using cannabis successfully, apparently, to keep himself stable. And then a couple of weeks after stopping using it for his girlfriend, he went off the wall and did a number of things that he certainly would regret now. But it definitely appears as though cannabis was helping him control his symptoms, and that 2 weeks later they're saying it was cannabis withdrawal, but I would suggest to you that it would be his symptoms getting out of control because they're not being managed properly anymore. Of course, you don't hear that angle here at all. It's that, it was the withdrawal of cannabis that caused the psychosis, and the media is very good at controlling messages when it comes to issues of medical marijuana or other cannabis related subjects. They're very prone to giving one side of the story if it's a prohibitionist story, and if it's a story questioning prohibition, well, they'll get both sides. They can't just tell our side of the story. They have to get the police quotes. But anyway, it's very frustrating dealing with the media. There's no doubt. Like, there's articles coming out in